think it's more complicated than simply that markets are usurping the role of government. I think what we're seeing is a merger between big government and big business, and I think that's part of the reason why it's a little bit hard for people to understand, because they know corporations have a great deal of power, but at the same time, states seem more important, right? I mean, we're seeing more active military intervention, more intervention in our lives in the form of surveillance. And we're seeing very active states, and we're seeing big spending states, what used to be called military Keynesianism, and certainly a willingness to spend a huge amount of money, to take very bold policy measures, but I would argue in the interests of multinationals, not in the interests of people, and that's the pattern that recurs. So it isn't that states aren't important. They're crucial to this process. But the question is, in whose interests are those states working? So it isn't about the end of the nation state or the end of the government. It's about this very dangerous merger between big government and big business. I call the model that we're living in corporatism because I think it accurately describes it. Another phrase is crony capitalism. If we hear that phrase in reference to Russia or Indonesia, we understand what that means. You have a powerful, strong-arm government that uses their power to prop up members of their family, prop up the people who fund their political campaigns. It's a trading of favors. I think it's actually a pretty good description of what's going on in the United States as well, of the Bush era. Part of the problem is we don't recognize it as a system in this country. There's a tremendous resistance to that. So the whole debate is within the language of exceptions. This is one corruption case. This is one contractor scandal, whether you're talking about Halliburton or Blackwater or Parsons. So, if you think about what we actually read in our newspapers, it's just an endless parade of corruption scandals. But each one is individualized. You don't take the extra step to say, okay, this is an economic model. This is how politicians fund their power base, and this is the payback. It's an ATM machine in the sense that politicians or contractors withdraw their budgets from government in the form of these huge contracts, and they pay back, not in the form of reliable work, but in the form of campaign contributions. So, it is a very effective model. It's a very self-serving model. It's not effective to the public, but for the players themselves, it's tremendously profitable, both politically and economically. So I think that's what we're living, and I think the first stage is to identify it as a system, and then figure out how you change it. And, it's pretty basic what needs to happen. I mean, there needs to be a real separation between the business of government and the world of business. And the first phase, I think, is real campaign finance reform. And this amazing, I think Americans have gotten used to this idea that political campaigns are so expensive that the first phase of even reporting on the campaign is, they're now reported on as if they are themselves corporations. They have, third quarter earnings, third quarter profits, and if Hillary has more money than Obama, then obviously she will win. So even the way we talk about political campaigns resembles the way we talk about corporations. So I think politics has to be way cheaper. That's one phase. So then, you're talking about media all of a sudden too, because the relationship with the public airwaves and the corporatist deal that was made in handing over the public airwaves to private corporations, it was a lousy deal for the public, because there should have been more negotiated in return for those licenses, like access to those airwaves for free during political campaigns, so that politicians don't have to raise so much money in order to run for office. So then you have this discount in politics. I mean, I think that's the first phase of separating these worlds. But in terms of what you were asking about, in terms of examples of this. There is this very fast-moving revolving door, and I think people realize that. And in the Bush era, it's gotten pretty dramatic in that people don't, usually the way it works is politicians stay in office through their term, and then, you know, when the Democrats win, the Republicans go to the private sector and cash in on their contacts. That's the way it works. The Bush era has been different in the sense that people don't even stay through their term. I mean, they're holding posts for very short periods, not even waiting for a change in administration before cashing in on those contracts. That high turnover, particularly in the departments that issue that are the prime ATM machines, like the Department of Homeland Security, one of the biggest problems they have is this extraordinarily high rate of turnover and the inability to hold on to experienced staff, because they immediately, as soon as they get those contracts, go into the private sector and then apply for the same contracts that they used to hand out. So you know, that's part of it, you know, the speed of that revolving door. But I would argue that much more dramatic in terms of what the Bush administration has done is really take out the door and put in an archway. And in many cases, there really isn't. You have politicians who never really got out of the private sector. And Cheney is the obvious example. Who, you know, Cheney never he went from Halliburton directly to the vice presidency, but he never sold his Halliburton shares. So all this time that Halliburton has profited tremendously from the war in Iraq, tremendously from high oil prices, Cheney has personally been profiting, and he will cash out when he's out of office. Rumsfeld was another example. He refused to sell his shares in Gilead Sciences. He used to chair the board of Gilead Sciences, which is a pharmaceutical company that owns the exclusive patent on Tamiflu, which is the treatment for the avian flu. So his economic fortunes improved dramatically while he was Secretary of Defense, because he wouldn't sell those shares, wouldn't sell those stocks, and while he was Secretary of Defense, there were many avian flu scares. Both the Pentagon, the Pentagon and I forget which department. Well, the U.S. government bought a great deal of Tamiflu, as did governments around the world, stockpiling in case of a pandemic. So the price of this stock went from 18, I think, to 83 while he was in office. So there is no revolving door there. There's just profiting from the very policies that you're advancing.